Welcome, everyone, to the Luminos LinkedIn Live discussion of the latest installment of the Luminos Method, Joyful Learning. I am thrilled and honored to be here today together with two extraordinary thought leaders in the space of play-based learning. First and foremost, Dr. Kwame Akyeampong, Professor of International Education and Development at Open University, a longtime evaluator of Luminos's work, and more recently, a board member as well. And Dr. Stjerne Thomsen, Head of Education Impact at LEGO Education. And I am Caitlin Barron, CEO of Luminos, and we are thrilled and honored to be together in discussion with all of you today. Luminos is dedicated to the cause of what we call unlocking the light in every child. We work to ensure children who have been denied the chance to go to school due to conflict or poverty get a second chance to learn. To date, we've enabled over 250,000 children across Africa and the Middle East to do so. And in the context of our work, we enable children who are often the first in their families to learn to read, to go from really not even knowing the full set of letters in the alphabet to being able to read short stories in just 1 year. And we could not possibly achieve those sorts of profound academic outcomes for children if our work were not grounded in what we call joyful learning. And so the Luminos Method, a collection of Luminos best practices that are carefully honed and gleaned in the context of our work with children at the margins, children who've been left out of school, but are equally relevant to children in the mainstream. We have detailed 9 different elements of the Luminos Method, and they all have their special place, but quite honestly, the one we're here talking about today is an element amongst elements. It is the foundational, fundamental principle that guides everything that we do at Luminos. And so I could not be more excited to be in discussion with Kwame and Bo today. A little bit of housekeeping at the top. I'd really invite everyone, please share your name, where you're coming from in the world, and any organization you might be a part of in the chat. We'd love to get to know everyone in on this discussion. We've had a wonderful, rich, and robust response to this event. And then also to say that we will be taking questions from the audience during this session. Please, as they occur to you, please add your questions, your comments right into that same chat window. And we will make sure that we get the chance to turn to at least some of those rich, robust questions before the end of the session today. Well, without further ado, I'd love to turn to my esteemed board member, Dr. Akyeampong, to actually help us get started. Kwame, can you help us set the scene a little bit in the context of your many years evaluating Luminos programming? You spent a lot of time in Luminos classrooms, so you have a real first-person sense of kind of what does joyful learning look like in the Luminos context. Can you just sort of center us in a typical Luminos classroom to get started? What might we see? What does joyful learning look like?
Okay. Thank you very much, Caitlin. It's a real pleasure to be in discussion with you about the joyful methods in Luminos work. I spent quite a bit of time evaluating the work in Ethiopia, and especially spending time in the classrooms, looking at what happens in these classrooms. And I think you can't help be struck by certain features of the classroom. So I want imagine entering this classroom space. What you immediately you come across is this very stimulating learning environment. And by that, I mean you do see a lot of images, a lot of objects, a lot of artifacts. But these are things that have been created in collaboration with the children. So these are things that are coming from the community, from the children's own home background. So it's a very rich, stimulating environment that you see. It is something that strikes you immediately. The second thing that you find is that you see that all the children are engaged in one way or the other in some kind of learning. And by that, I mean that you see there's not simply children sitting down and listening, but actually there's a lot of movement a lot of hand movement, a lot of talking, but also children working in different groups, doing things that that really mean a lot to them. So you see a lot of that happening in the same classroom space. So you don't have the same thing going on at the same time. But I think it strikes you also that these children are also enjoying what they're doing. I think this is important. It is not mechanical. It is something that you can see. It involves play. It involves some actions. So there is a sense in which they are enjoying what they're doing. It's part and parcel of how they are learning, and it strikes you as very, very significant. I think that the other thing that comes across is just how the children are taking responsibility also for their learning. So that their agency in learning is expressed through their activity, through their contributions to learning. So you do not see the teacher as the main focus of the learning activity. You see actually children who are co-creating the learning, involved in different activities, and have a very vibrant classroom space. And I think this is what you see throughout. Sometimes it feels a little bit noisy because all the children are engaged in doing things, and that seems to be normal for the children, but they engage in activity that is meaningful to them. And I think this is the essence of the environment you see, the classroom you see. There's real, the space is stimulating, the children are having fun learning, but the learning is also very purposeful, and they're doing different things and exchanging the ideas. In one particular thing that we came across in some of the classroom in Ethiopia was the fact that the children were given time to reflect on what they are learning and to share, to express that. And I think this is striking, that it's not restricted to just a few learners who are doing, but everybody has the opportunity to express what they are learning. So this is really something that I believe that if you enter the Luminos classroom, immediately these things really strike you as quite unique.
Yeah, Kwame, it's a wonderful overview. And I think you've done a fantastic job of bringing to life really the essence of what we try to do at Luminos, which is take all of the principles and practices that we know from very high resourced classrooms around the globe in terms of what joyful, effective learning looks like for children, especially in the early years of their learning journey, but to reimagine those principles and practices in a very low resource setting, realizing that actually the lack of resource doesn't actually need to change the pedagogy. It just needs to change the materials and the modality, right? So I thought that was a great introduction. And when we think about joyful learning here at Luminos, we do have a specific definition in mind. And it's really a three-part element. The first is, first and foremost, we always emphasize that not just joyful learning of any kind really can't happen until we can provide children with a safe and inclusive learning environment. And in many of the geographies where we work, that is not a foregone conclusion. And so creating that space of safety where children can express themselves and thrive is a real foundation for everything that comes after that. But secondly, when we talk about joyful learning, we think about what we call a meaningful course of study. One of the most important things about our program is children early on come to understand themselves as clever. And they understand themselves as clever because they see themselves succeeding in the classroom. About half the children in the Luminos program would have started school in the past, struggled to learn, and been pulled out by their parents. So there's quite a lot of work that we need to do to help children start learning in measurable, tangible ways, really from their first day in the classroom. And that's important, not just because we have a lot of ground to cover academically in a short period of time, but equally it's important because of what it does to change the child and the child's parents' concepts of what's possible for that child. And then third is, probably the part of joyful learning that we might naturally think of that's actually the fun part. And that is equally fundamental. So we call that a playful pedagogy. We have students with us for an intensive program. It can be 7 or 8 hours a day. Those are long days, especially for children who've not been in a formal educational environment before. And so, quite frankly, if the pedagogy wasn't fun, it wouldn't be effective. And so we really like to talk about how there's kind of a false dichotomy between fun and effectiveness in the education space. We actually see one as fundamental to the other. But we know all too well, quite honestly, that is not always the case. We would all hope that not only each of our own children, but every child everywhere would have the chance to learn in a joyful learning environment. But Bo, I know you have dedicated your life to advocating for just that. And the reason you work so hard to advocate for that cause is because, quite frankly, it's not the norm. Actually, the normal learning environment may in fact look very, very different from the kind of environment that Kwame, the picture that Kwame just painted for us. And I wonder, just to help us sort of get started, can you juxtapose, so if Kwame's picture is a picture of joyful learning, what is the more typical picture that you find in early learning classrooms around the world?
Absolutely. And thank you for organizing this webinar on such an important topic and a great example, Kwame, to introduce this with from the Luminos intervention. So I'm really excited you said that joyful learning is a foundational principle. It's actually what we also hear among educators, among parents, that happiness is fundamental to learning. But in reality is when you're going to prioritize it, it's very difficult when you are faced with a stressed, highly competitive, and often resource constrained environment. So then it suddenly becomes fun and play is a nice to have, even it should be kind of completely integrated with how we see not only academic, but a broader range of skills being supported. So that is a kind of false dichotomy we have been building up when we have been trying to standardize education and not realize the local potential of communities. So I think there's one fundamental things that Kwame also touched upon here in the good examples, and that is our lack of ability to recognize and listen to children and the potential they bring with their agency. Because we often think that they are kind of empty vessels and they don't really know how to navigate complexity or learn. But actually, if we give them opportunities to take responsibility, give them choices to collaborate, that's where we can have an environment that flourishes. And that requires exactly the principles that you mentioned in terms of establishing that safety and security, ensure that it's meaningful to their own interests, the context they're in, so they can connect that knowledge to that strategy, and that it's pedagogies where they can take responsibility and have choices. So when we visit, some of the Lego Foundation programs in more than 30 countries, that is definitely not the norm. Not only is it quite stressful, low resource environments, very competitive, where there are literally no opportunity to fail. So that's why play becomes not the norm, because you're so high stakes to succeed with testing and getting into education and jobs, that it becomes a very painful environment to grow up in. So it's a passive environment. It's not actively engaging. It's, for many instances, children are bored. It is definitely not joyful. Mm-hmm. It's very individually competitive and not collaboratively. We know that children learn when they can share ideas, they collaborate, observe each other. And it means that there's very little agency to children to test and try out, to have confidence in asking questions and iterating. So I've literally walked into spaces also where you have 40 children sitting in a small space with 2 small windows, trying to find the teacher at the end of the classroom, and not even close to joy, but not even stimulating in any form and shape, because there's such a pressure on getting children into education, a standardized way of learning. So, that's kind of where many classrooms in very low constrained environments looks like. And I think one of your models here illustrates that actually can work in any community if we try to tackle the right barriers.
Bo, it's a wonderful overview, and given that you have dedicated really your entire professional career to advocating for what's possible, that it's possible to bring joyful learning even into hard to reach, low resource settings. I wonder if you can rewind the clock for us a little bit. Like what first drew you to this cause?
Yeah, just a few things. The first is obviously my background was much more creative. Not necessarily education per se, but my education background was design, learning science, and then engineering combined. And I realized that when you're engaged in things you're really passionate about, you're exploring projects, not only is it something that's meaningful and interesting to you, but you actually learn much more. To actually remember things more deeply, you're able to make a difference with the things you make, and you work much better towards the local solution. So, creativity and active engagement and so forth, and joy is not opposite to you having deeper engagement, more memorable, and a broader range of skills. Then secondly, what we've done in the Lego Foundation over the past decade is to pick up on the science that exists among some of the best research partners around the world. And we learned that actually there are artificial boundaries being created between what the science would say is about effective ways of learning and sometimes what practiced out there. Actually, sometimes it's very disconnected and everyone wants the same thing. So this opportunity to take and create a community and a movement around what the science of joyful learning actually looks like is a huge opportunity. And then finally, being part of a series of programs over many years, I realized the practices actually exist. I think we need to put a spotlight on the things that actually works, no matter the background, no matter the circumstances of educators or children. If they work with the community, find opportunities in local materials, actually playful learning is a strategy for any child. And I think there's an incredible opportunity right now to make that more scalable.
No, it's a fantastic entry point and makes absolute sense. And ultimately, our job is unlocking each child's passion. So reminding us of those passions that it launched us on our own careers is a really wonderful place to center and anchor this conversation. Just a quick message to those who may be joining us now. I'm thrilled to be in conversation with Dr. Kwame Akyeampong and Dr. Stjerne Thomsen. We welcome your questions. Please feel free to add them into the chat. We will be opening up the conversation and taking some of those as the discussion moves forward. So, Bo, just to keep building on that thread, if we know that children everywhere learn best when they're happy, if we know that joyful learning is possible, even in some of the toughest corners of the globe, like what's the barrier? What's holding us back from making this a reality?
That's a really good question, because it's something we've dedicated a lot of effort towards, because traditionally in our work, you want to kind of scale and support educators, finding ways to bring more materials and good practices, but there are actually systemic barriers that often are very difficult to address. And one of them is really too narrow definitions of our outcomes. So we need to broaden the success criteria for what education looks like. As long as it's only academic outcomes quite narrowly, that everyone succeed in the same thing at the same time in the same way, instead of recognizing that the well-being, the safety, the inclusion is fundamental, that children actually should be emotionally invested and engaged and enjoy the learning environment, then we cannot really tackle the other issues. So it's recognizing that there are a broader range of outcomes to succeed with our education, and we can actually observe them. We can actually teach towards these as integrated outcomes. The second thing is really about leadership. Leadership recognizing that holistic approach to education is something that should be advocated for at the school level, at the district level, so it becomes an integrated part of how we teach our curriculums. So there's a leadership endorsement and a vision that needs to be challenged. So it gives opportunity for educators to actually take these practices and use it. And then thirdly, it is actually some education and some support for educators to be able to use this. So when we talk about the stimulating environment, particularly in certain stressful, low resource environments, educators need to start with local communities, materials, give some structure, some guidance to how the teaching approaches are. And that's not natural as part of teacher education or professional development. Educators usually come from probably a somehow rigid education, even ourselves, and need to put our minds towards how do we facilitate a classroom that is, as Kwame is mentioning, might be noisy at times, might be more complex, might be more collaborative, might be more testing and trying out things. This is not chaos. It's a systematic way of guiding the outcomes and giving choice to students, but it requires a different level of support for educators. So something around the teacher education and professional development. At least that's kind of 3 ways of starting.
Yeah, this is an absolutely fantastic rundown. And I think that, that last point in particular is so important, Bo. It's not enough to tell teachers sort of, don't teach to the class en masse, don't be rigid, don't be overly strict. We actually have to empower them with a different way of learning and recognize that really in most of the contexts that at least we work at in Luminos, we're asking teachers to teach in a way that is fundamentally different from the way they themselves were taught. And so that is quite a revolutionary journey, and not underestimating what it takes to bring about that transformation for teachers, for principals, for parents. Really, but bringing the adults along with the transformation is sometimes more challenging than bringing the kids along, isn't it? So.
Actually, if I can add there, absolutely. I think the parents and the community is absolutely essential. Like, no matter the circumstances, one needs to work between the school and the community, because there's a lot of pressure also on the educators to fulfill expectations of parents who also have ambitions on education on their children's behalf. So that dialogue absolutely is very, very important.
Oh, I love that. So Kwame, you did a great job at the top of really setting the stage for kind of what does joyful learning look like at Luminos. And as we've said, these are fun classrooms, but it's not always play for play's sake, right? It's really play that's anchored in the learning journey. And so one of the key principles of joyful learning that we often talk about is the importance of having a meaningful course of study, right? So recognizing that each moment of the child's time in the classroom is a precious thing. And so being thoughtful and prepared to really make the most of that learning opportunity to enable the child to experience success in the classroom. But fundamental to Luminos is doing that in a way that is authentically anchored in the unique community and context in which we work. So one of the things we always like to say is that we're trying to bring the best of global learning practice, but to sort of plant the seeds that bloom then in a unique learning environment. So tapping leaders from the communities in which we work, using materials that are locally made, using books that feature children who look and sound like the children in our classrooms. And all of those are themes that you flagged for us very early on in our learning journey, and I know have been a central part of your broader research, beyond the Luminos program. And so I wonder if there's anything you wanted to say about kind of the role of having a meaningful program of study and the centrality of that to actually achieving joyful learning and purposeful learning in the classroom.
Yeah, thank you very much. I couldn't agree more even with a lot of the points that Bo has made, which I think is fundamental to what you see as creating more meaningful learning. I think that we can talk about a program of study that really connects with these children's interest and background. But I think fundamentally, any program of study, and particularly what I observed in when we were evaluating the work, the Luminos classrooms, is that fundamentally, you've got to believe that every child has the capacity to learn. I think it's so important in the program, because often a lot of instruction is teaching to the top achievers. That is what drives instruction. But if we start with a program of study that believes fundamentally that every child that sits in that classroom has a huge potential to learn, and what we have to do is to unlock that potential, and that children learn at different paces and connect indifferently through different things. Some children may learn through doing certain things which connects with their experience much better than others. So creating that kind of environment where you trust that every child has the ability to learn, I think it's fundamental to any program of study. But linked to that is also ensuring that the program of study is targeting the child's learning level. So that is why you would see when I've been in Luminos classrooms that often children are all doing the same thing. They are doing different things. And that's important because the program of instruction is linked to their levels and recognizes and respects that and helps them to move along at that level. And even when you have a whole class where the teacher is orchestrating the learning, there is space for those different learning to be expressed, to be communicated, to be engaged with. So I think this is very important. That program has to be really targeted on the belief that every child has the potential to reach their maximum. And that instruction is basically trying to do that. It sounds very simple to say, but unfortunately, a lot of programs are not built on that basis. And we need to really shape teachers understanding that every child has that potential. But the other thing is that what is taught has to be grounded in context. And I think this is what Bo said earlier, that if you look in these classrooms, what is there is really drawing on what is in their environment and using the resource they have, the funds of knowledge which exist within the community are resources for learning. And often we dismiss that, but that's what helps children to connect with their learning. So it is important that any program of study really connects with these funds of knowledge that the children bring, with the context within which they exist, and allows them to bridge that gap between what happens in the classroom and the experiences outside. And that is why I want to also highlight mother tongue. The sad reality is that a lot of children come into school and they are taught in a language which they struggle with. And that is the first thing that kills their creativity, their interest, and their ability to learn. So I think we find that mother tongue, or the language of instruction, the language of communication, is critical. If their first experience of learning is through a language which they cannot understand, in an environment which is alien to their own environment, you're beginning to lose children interest in learning. You cannot create joyful learning in that kind of environment. So I think these three elements are important. One is that the program has to be linked or tailored to their levels, making sure that it's at their level, targeted instruction. Secondly, you have to make sure that it's in a context, you're drawing resources that they are familiar with and they're engaged with. And also you're creating this agency for them to express themselves, to engage meaningfully. I think there is no distinction between that and the more cognitive measurements we have about learning outcomes. Actually, in our research, we found that when you create those environments, these children actually learn better, achieve better. But more importantly, they can sustain that. Because remember, life is about moving and adapting to different environments. So those experiences they have in the classrooms are transferable when they move along in the schools in which they transition into. So these are things that will set them up for further success in their learning. And I think this is something that programs of instruction, of learning should take into account when you're thinking about how you connect with children and setting them up for future success in learning.
Kwame, I think that's such an important note to leave us on. And we had a great question in the chat a bit earlier about sort of how do we assess impact and learning in a way that is comprehensive and holistic. And I think that your comment really actually anticipates that question and provides a great sort of first pass at an answer there. I want to make sure we get the chance to open up for questions here. And we've had some lovely questions from Amog and Drew on teachers. Basically a variety of questions here. What are the key elements for helping teachers embark on this pretty revolutionary journey of bringing joy into the classroom? How do we manage the change management of that? And Amog then adding on sort of how do we sustain teachers' joy, not just students' joy? And I'd welcome both of your comments there on the subject of specifically sort of empowering, enabling teachers to advance joyful learning.
Yeah. Maybe I just make it in response to that. I think that we put a lot of many interventions add more work to teachers. What this does, what I think joyful learning does, is to actually help teachers to see that in creating learning, children have a contribution to make. So they are co-creators of learning, of knowledge with children. And I think that frees teachers to be supportive, to learning of children, so that we are not adding to their workload. We are actually seeing these children as resources. So I think that what Joyful Learning is advocating is not another set of things that teachers need to do, but actually democratizing, if you like, the learning space, where the teachers actually do the things they are best at doing, supporting learning, facilitating learning, and trusting that children, when they do that, children can learn. So this takes off the pressure of teachers. And I think this is what I think many teacher education programs need to really focus attention on.
Yeah, I think that's really spot on. And Bo, I don't know if you have anything you want to add on the subject.
Yeah, a few things, because it's a very important question. And I think the starting point is to acknowledge that, this is not at the expense of traditional learning outcomes. This actually strengthens children's understanding and deepening of knowledge. So they actually remember things for longer, but they also problem solve. They're actually having greater confidence and so forth. So that's kind of the starting point. I think educators need some support in advocating upwards towards leadership, school leadership, towards parents. So start by equipping educators and have the confidence to say that joy and curiosity is actually part of what we're aiming for. That's setting children up for success. That's how they navigate uncertainty and actually learn better. So giving them that confidence and tools to advocate to the community and upwards, so they have the space to try these things. The second thing in that change management we have seen is for educators to form strong communities together. The most effective ways to learn some of this is to learn from each other. So try to establish that trust, that you actually observe each other sometimes, share examples, and gradually establish a learning culture where you improve. Because, there's so many different ways of doing this. This is not a scripted one way of applying it. It's more like a guidance. It can look like project-based learning, where students develop a food truck or something really passionate about exhibiting. It could be addressing a local community problem or doing community garden. It could be experiential learning, where they go out and visiting a small art center or something like this. So what educators need is to learn from each other, observe and give feedback, and then they're building the momentum. And then, as Kwame, I do want to mention that, inviting children and their ideas, make transparent, these are the expectations we are aiming for, what we aim to achieve. But actually, I'm not sure how I do this. Like, how could we do this? It's a good question to invite children, depending on the age group, to explore ideas.
I think that's absolutely spot on. We had a great question earlier talking about assessment and kind of thinking about near-term impacts of joyful learning versus long-term impacts. And I know you both have spent some time really thinking about that. And I wonder if you can speak to sort of, we know by feel, by touch, why joyful learning is important in the moment, right? Like we quite simply won't keep children effectively learning in a classroom for a long, hot day if it's not fun to be there. But what's the significance for the long term? I mean, for the kind of adults they grow up to be.
This goes back to some of the work that we did, looking at the children who had gone through the program, but who actually have transitioned into the formal school system and what we learn. I think we forget that much as we want children to acquire literacy and numeracy skills and to be competent in these areas, learning is much more than that. And we don't need to wait till we begin to look at some of the aspects of learning much later. Actually, they are the foundations for future success. So what I think that the joyful learning environment creates is those soft skills that children need in becoming successful learners as they progress in their education. And so when you see children who are engaging in some activity, are problem solving, are using objects to create things, are visually engaging with other things, you're actually setting them up for them to be more successful later on. And we should not underestimate this aspect of learning. We tend to think these are a means to an end for them to become literate and numerate. But it's a means to also a bigger end for them to become more successful learners. And we found that when children had gone through the Luminos classrooms and they transitioned into the formal classrooms, those teachers often said, we wish every child we went through that, because these are the children who are much more agentic. They are much more willing to step forward. They are much more willing to organize their friends into learning groups. They are much more willing to take initiative. Now, these were acquired through the methods of learning that they experienced when they were in the Luminos classrooms. So I think we should not underestimate those opportunities we create for them to express, to speak, for children to get up and actually speak. It's a skill that they need. For them to explain is a skill that they need. For them to collaborate and cooperate is a skill that they need. So if we create that as a means to helping them to acquire literacy and numeracy, we are actually also creating the basic skills that they would need as they progress to learn. So I think that's how come I see this as not simply helping children who have falling behind to learn, but actually preparing them, as these teachers were telling us, that these children were much more open to learning, solving problems, and tackling them in a way which they hadn't before. Many of them hadn't started to learn in English. They had started to learn in their mother tongue. But they were even able to make better transition after the initial struggle to transition into English. But they caught up very quickly because they were using the same skills that they acquired when they were exposed to these learning approaches. So I think what we are talking about is really about lifelong learning, the foundations, the fundamentals of lifelong learning that we imbue in children through joyful learning that establish them to be more successful as they move forward.
Yeah, Kwame, that's really beautifully said. Bo, I don't know if you want to add any comments to that.
I think that was beautifully said, and I shouldn't add a lot more. I just want to reinforce that message, and maybe with two things. First is the things that will define the future of education and success is your ability to learn new things. So you really need to enjoy learning new things, even when they're challenging, and that's what Kwame talks about, right? Lifelong learning. So if you don't enjoy the learning process now, it's a huge risk that you'll never be able to keep learning and enjoying things that are difficult, because it will be the key parameter going forward. And the second thing is, it's quite pivotal. A research that came out last year that the future work, or the current work actually, is not really only about these breadths of skills that are needed, but what employees are looking for is actually employees who have curiosity, who have resilience, who are able to learn new things, who are able to collaborate, who have creativity. It literally moved up, not even skills any longer, but the ability to learn new things and being curious is at the top of the list of what we hope to recruit for in the work, anywhere in the world, because it's such uncertain, such new technology. So that's not, that's how we want to see a classroom, being curious, being resilient, and so forth. It's actually the kind of environment that we hope that we sustain.
As well, Bo, I think that's just so well said. And we've had some absolutely beautiful first-person stories in the chat of really what it looks like when we support that kind of learning environment, what that means, not just for students, but for teachers who then are sort of given permission to bring their whole selves to the classroom as well. So on that note, gentlemen, as we come to the close of our time together, paint us a picture of the future. I mean, we know that we see sort of pockets of brilliance today. We have evidence and proof points that joyful learning is really fundamental to learning of all kinds. But actually making that a reality at the systems level is a daunting task. And we know that there's distance to travel between where we are today collectively and where we would ultimately want to be. But paint us a picture, like what might joyful learning in classrooms around the world look like in 5-10 years time? What is it? What is a future state we can steer our ship towards? Bo, maybe if you want to take a first swing at that, and then
Absolutely, I can do
close
that.
us out, that would be great.
I think we started out by talking a lot about this opportunity to see the classroom in the eyes of a child. I hope that that's kind of where our starting point is, that when we enter classrooms in the future, it is not just by the bell, but actually a teacher who knows your interests, who knows your unique way of learning, where it's not organized in desks and rows, but like group work, small campfires. It's an environment that is stimulating, decorated with local projects that children have made, and you have this laughter and excitement in the room. And I think that what we hope for in like 10 years ahead is that teachers really loves to teach. And I think we are right now at a challenge, because right now educators are struggling with giving that space opportunity also to test and try out things and to be playful. And actually being a guide on the side is much more interesting as a teacher. And they learn much more than being channeling information from one side of the classroom. So I think the future of the classroom is not measured by the success in test scores. It's literally whether we support curiosity, support confidence in asking difficult questions, and children are working alongside each other in the classroom. So I think that can happen no matter the context.
I love that, Bo.
Yeah, I totally share what Bo has said, and I think that we are at a crossroads when it comes to the future of learning for many children, particularly from poor and marginalized communities. I think we have to imagine the future of a classroom where, irrespective of where the child is from, their background, that we have a classroom or a learning environment which really believes in the child as a learner. A classroom in which learning is really a space in which children actually feel safe, feel that they can express themselves, they can contribute, and where teachers are actually, as Bo has said, are become better facilitators of learning. The tools for learning are going to increase. We saw what happened when we had COVID. You couldn't get children in the classroom. What are you going to do as a teacher? So we're getting more even tools for learning. So the whole responsibility for learning is one that is shared between the child, the student, the teacher, and the community. So I see a future where the community has a stake in the learning of children, in the environment in which children find themselves. Teachers feel more supported. And then when we look at successful learning, we are not only looking at it through the lens of what teachers do, but we're looking at whether successful learning is creating joyful learning environments. And we place as much emphasis on that as we place on the traditional things we look for. Because we know we have the evidence, as Bo said earlier on, we have very strong evidence that this kind of environment is what produces successful learners and learning. So I hope that the future of learning would embrace all these dimensions, and we'll see children from the disadvantaged, marginalized, actually making significant progress, because we are connecting learning to their context. We are valuing their contribution. We are not seeing their poverty status as a disadvantage, but as the fact that they have a wealth of knowledge which they can contribute to their learning space. That will change the way in which children learn, but also create a great future for them as well.
And indeed change the way in which we view all of humanity, right? When we recognize the essential potential of every child to do extraordinary things, it changes not just the lives of those children, but the way we see the world we all live in. Kwame, I can't imagine a better note on which to leave this conversation. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being with us. I invite you to please hop along to the Luminos Fund website. Feel free to read more on how we've worked to make joyful learning a reality in Luminos classrooms, and please continue to engage with us online. We're excited to hear from all of you on your ideas and your best practices for making joyful learning a reality for every child everywhere. Thank you all so much.